Hi, it's Donna Joy Usher, and I am here on beautiful Rottnest Island. So I'm lucky enough to be spending the night here with my mother, who's been staying with me for a few weeks. Rottnest Island is an island off Perth, and it's home of the quokka. So one of only a couple of places in the world that the quokka lives. Quokka's like a really cute little marsupial, kind of like a very, very small wallaby kangaroo. And they live on Rottnest because there's no native or natural predators here, or no introduced predators here, whereas on the mainland they've all been wiped out. So only a couple of islands in Western Australia where they still exist. That's not why we're here, although we're here enjoying the quokka. Well, that's not why I'm shooting this video. I want to shoot this video because I am at the moment doing a podcast series on attachment styles, and my third out of 5 is about to be released, and I just wanted to talk about it briefly here, just in case you are the sort of person who prefers video to podcasts. So last week I talked about a type of attachment style called secure attachment, and the week before I kind of went through what attachment styles are, how they form, very briefly and basically, in case you didn't see those 2 videos or listen to those 2 podcast episodes. Attachment styles is basically to do with relationship, how we form relationships with others, and it's basically how safe we feel in relationship, and whether or not we're able to form secure relationship, like secure attachments to people where we feel very safe, or whether or not we have some trust issues, so whether or not we don't feel safe and we've adapted in some way. And it's to do with our relationship with our caregivers when we were very small, so baby, toddler, the formative years when the unconscious was developing and deciding and breaking up rules on how to stay safe. So last week I talked about secure attachment, which is really what we want to be able to have in relationships with others. Today I want to talk about anxious attachment. Now obviously attachment styles are very complex. There's whole books written on them. So what I'm going to be touching on in this podcast and our series and in these videos is very brief. But if you are really interested in it, if it does really resonate with you and you'd like to learn more about it, then you can buy books, or I've listened to a whole podcast series. I've got a couple of mentors who I've learnt this from in the tantric space, so Georgia Rose and Chantel Raven, and in my podcast notes I have linked to them so that you can go and find out more about them as well and see what they're teaching and what their learnings are. But we can have different attachment styles with different people in our lives too. So we might have one attachment style with one caregiver, like one parent, and a different with a different one. We might have different attachment styles with siblings, friends. So for instance, I very easily secure attached to women. With men, I tend to be more of an anxious attacher. So I want to talk about anxious attachment today. Now, I was totally unaware of attachment styles, even though I'd learned about them when I studied to be an analytical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. I kind of didn't realize how deeply ingrained they were. And I didn't realize I was an anxious attacher until it was triggered up in me 6 months ago. And up to that point, I had been very happy by myself. Left my relationship. I was very happy by myself. And then something happened and I just went into this loop and I didn't know what was going on. And I had all these sensations in my body and all these thoughts were going on, and I was holding myself firm within it and just observing it, but it was something I couldn't break out of. And I did a lot of hypnotherapy, a lot of spiritual healing on it, and I learned about attachment styles, and I started diving into that and using my knowledge of attachment styles with my knowledge of healing, and using my beautiful Charlotte and beautiful Keith, my 2 mentors who've taught me a lot in the healing space, working with them, going into my woundings and into different things that happened to me in my life that developed this anxious attachment style in me to bring me through. And I'm happy to say that I'm pretty much clear of it now, and I can feel that I am more in secure attachment within my life in general, and that the anxious attachment, I am able to observe it within myself if it does trigger up and move back into secure attachment. So what is anxious attachment? So anxious attachment is formed when we're very small and our caregivers meet our needs inconsistently. So there's a circle of trust that develops with a child where we have a need, we make the need known, so we cry, we whinge, we whatever to make our need known, and then our need is met, and then we develop trust, we develop that we're safe, that adults are safe, and that we're loved and we're worthy of having our needs met, and then and this circle goes on. So if your needs are met 38% of the time, you're able to form secure attachment. But if there is inconsistent needs being met, then this is when different attachment styles are formed. And there's avoidant, which I'm going to talk about next time, anxious, and disorganized. They're the three sort of very generalizing, the three main attachment styles, apart from secure. Now, you can be moving in and out of them as well with different people as well. So for instance, I might be an anxious attacher in intimate relationship, but at the end of my last relationship, I had become avoidant because I'd become so hurt that I had become avoidant and pulled back. So it's basically how we protect ourselves, our attachment style. So, it's like addictions. We see them as a problem, but really they're a solution. Our attachment style is a solution on how to stay safe. However, it's often the solution that kept us safe when we were young, or that we're using now to not feel things, to numb ourselves to our pain, is not actually allowing us to be happy. So even though things might be a solution, it doesn't mean that we don't need to do some work and do some healing on ourselves so that we can naturally be in flow, be in the moment, and be able to be relaxed and safe in our body. So anxious attachers. Anxious attachers are when our needs are inconsistently met. And it's really about impact versus intention. So often we have very well-intended caregivers, but it's the impact of what happens. So for instance, if you remember when the whole, I can't remember what they call it, the baby cry came in. It's like the baby cry, but the baby will self-soothe, right? And the baby would eventually stop crying, but what was actually happening? The baby wasn't self-soothing because the baby didn't have the ability to self-regulate at that point, because the baby didn't know safety, and the baby would actually work themselves up to such a point that they would go into freeze mode. And so the children that were put through this sort of, being put to bed like that and being allowed to self-soothe or self-regulate weren't actually self-regulating. They're actually going into freeze mode in the fight-flight system, in the sympathetic nervous system. So sometimes it's well-intended caregivers that can still create attachment style issues within us. So when our needs are not consistently met, then an anxious attacher, basically their biggest thing is a fear of rejection. So when your need isn't consistently met and you don't know whether or not your need is going to be met, then you become anxious. And what we learn to believe is that we're not worthy of our need being met. Maybe we're not worthy of being lovable. And anxious attachers tend to be quite needy, quite graspy in relationship. And this is, as I said, I'm generalizing here. I'm going to be really blowing up the actual how it looks. So people can be like mild. They don't always have to be as big as I'm making it. And sometimes it might just come up little bits of the time, not be there all the time. But an anxious attacher will initially, in an intimate relationship, when it's that whole initial oh my God, I'm getting all this attention, they feel amazing, right? Because this wound that they have of not being worthy, of not being lovable, is being soothed. When somebody's showing them attention, when someone's showing them love in that beginning stage of a relationship, it's like, oh, it's okay, I'm safe, right? But then obviously in normal relationship, in the average relationship that dies, people start to pull back and start to reestablish their own identity. And at that point, the anxious attacher goes into a tailspin because this thing that was making them feel lovable and worthy is being taken back, or they feel taken away. When in reality, it's just kind of like people have gone back into more of a norm of needing space and needing freedom within relationship. So at that point, the anxious attacher can get quite needy and quite graspy, trying to get back this attention that they had that was making them feel so good about themselves and making them feel loved and lovable. And they, rather than giving themselves what they need and being able to love themselves and making themselves feel secure, they rely on other people to do it. So we tend to be people pleasers. We do a lot for other people because it makes us feel good, right? We can be quite, it's this thing like, oh, we're so loving and we're so giving and we do everything for everybody else, but it's actually quite narcissistic in a way, because we're doing it to know how we feel when we're doing it. When people show us appreciation, it's about how it makes us feel, right? Anxious attachers tend not to have boundaries. So we often don't know ourselves even well enough to know what we like and what we don't, because we flow into other people's energy, and we're like chameleons where we can be whatever they need us to be so that we can stay in their energy and stay getting their attention so that we feel loved and we feel worthy. So So I don't know if you remember the Runaway Bride movie with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, where he basically worked out that in each relationship she'd been at, the way she liked her eggs was the way the man had liked the eggs. She had done whatever their interests were. She hadn't had any interests of her own. So that right there is a beautiful portrayal of an anxious attacher. She had gone in, like a very strong, independent, woman had gone in, or maybe not independent, but a strong woman, right? She was she was a plumber, wasn't she? Had gone into these relationships and then had just chameleoned herself into whatever this man wanted her to be, had morphed into almost like a female version of him to stay safe without even knowing what she was doing, right? And she wasn't happy. That's why she was running away at the altar. But ultimately, anxious attachers aren't happy doing this, but they don't know how to self-soothe, self-regulate and meet their own needs because it's too painful. It's too painful being alone. Now, in saying that, an anxious attacher can be alone, but when they get into intimate connection with somebody, this gets triggered up. So it's not always a case of always being like this, but once you're in, sometimes it can be just once you're in intimate connection. But then other times, an anxious attacher can be like this continuously with people, needy with their relationships, needy with their friendships, needy with their family, because their wound is so great and the discomfort that's there is so great that they just can't sit with it within themselves. They need somebody else to make them feel good about themselves. So what else about anxious attachers? Anxious attachers don't feel safe in love. They don't feel like they're worthy. Their boundaries are almost non-existent. So I know that one of the big things for me when I left my relationship a few years ago was actually this whole who am I question, because I had lost myself in the relationship because I had been it was easier for me to compromise and to do what they had wanted than to put my foot down to do what I wanted, because then that was what they wanted to do, and it was it would become a bit of a very a small drama. It wasn't huge, right? But it just got easier just to do what they wanted to do, and because what they wanted to do was always fun. I could enjoy it because I am a chameleon. I can enjoy anything, nearly everything. I would just give in and do what they wanted to do. But over time, I lost my shape, I lost my identity, I lost my voice. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted. And because I'd been in this relationship from so young, I'd never really developed that beforehand. So it was really hard for me to get to the point where I could leave because it was a good person. But I was just deeply, deeply unhappy because my needs weren't even being recognized. And when I did voice something, a want or a need, then I was made to feel high maintenance, and then I would pull back, right? That whole fear of rejection would come up again. So anxious attachers are naturally attracted to avoidance, and avoidance are naturally attracted to anxious attachers. There's a real polarity there, right? And an avoidant is somebody who sees freedom. Their fear in relationship is loss of freedom. An anxious attacher's fear in relationship is rejection. So the two of them have this polarity, and it's almost like puzzle pieces fitting together, because the avoidant pulls their energy back and the anxious pushes their energy in. But the two of them are meeting kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where they come together, it's fireworks, it's amazing, it's like, oh my God, I know this energy. They each recognize it because it's the energy in each other that created how they are. So it's what they had as their childhood. Similarly, what they're attracted to is the energy that created them the way they were, the way they are as an attacher. So it doesn't take long before the anxious attacher's worst fear comes true because they're in there so much that the avoidance starts to feel smothered and needs space and freedom to pull back. And then that triggers up the anxious attacher, like, oh my God, I'm being rejected, oh my God, I'm not wanted, I'm not lovable, and all that angst comes in there, and then they want more, and they're grasping, and then the avoidant is like, oh my God, what's going on here? And they're pulling back further and further. Now, interestingly enough, if an anxious attacher then gets sick of that and moves off and gives this avoidant space, they will then come back and like, hey, how you doing? And then it's on again. So there's a real push-pull dynamic between an avoidant and an anxious attacher. So anxious attachers, how can they heal this? Well, basically, the first thing to do if you are an anxious attacher is to observe this within yourself. The common words that come out of an anxious attacher's mouth is, I just want to be seen. I just want to be seen. Because when we're not being seen because we're not showing up as who we are. We're not showing up in our own shape because we flow into other people's energy and we be what they need us to be. And yet we want to be seen, but then we have a fear of being seen, because what if somebody did see us and then they rejected us? I mean, that would be the worst. If we actually showed up as who we are and our heart, and then they didn't want us, that would be so devastating. It's too painful. So we don't show up as who we are. And that's what happened to me 6 months ago. I actually got to the point of healing where I showed up as who I was, and then my worst nightmare of rejection came in, and all of this stuff in me that I'd never even known was there, but it was obviously in the background playing out in a mild way, got triggered up in like force. And it was a terrible 6-month process of like being in this discomfort every day and holding myself in it, going into process every day, trying to work through what this was in me, going back to the traumas, working through it and like breathing through it. And then every time I got through it, I would throw myself back in to trigger it back up again so I could work through it. And it was a conscious decision I was doing, where as soon as I was through and on the other side of the pain, I would go back in so that I could sounds very masochistic, but I knew that what was happening in me was not good and I needed to face it. So I made myself keep going back in again and again and again, and then not doing what I wanted to do, was not being needy, not being grasping, not reaching out and begging for my need to be met and for my pain to have someone else take my pain away. And I made myself sit in it and go back into the fire. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read the Twilight books, when Bella is turning into a vampire, and initially she's got morphine in her system, so she can't move, and she's in so much pain that she can't move at all. But then she realizes that what a blessing it is that she can't move, because Edward doesn't know how much pain she's in, so he's not in agony knowing what pain she's going through. But then at the end, when the morphine starts to wear off and she can move, she actually now is like, when she feels like she's on fire, but now she's clinging to the stake, clinging to the stake while she's on fire, so that she doesn't move, doesn't let him know how much pain she's in. It's kind of like what I felt like. I was just holding myself to the stake, letting myself burn, letting myself be in this discomfort so that I could heal through it, because I didn't want this ever to happen to me again. So healing this stuff can be hard work, it can be uncomfortable, but it's better than living like that forever, right? Living like that for your whole life, where you're just a puppet to this unconscious programming that happened when we were small children, right? We formed these attachment styles often before we could even talk, before we could even walk. And they're what is like driving us today, this belief system, this foundation system that's inside us. It's what is causing us to act and react, and running our nervous system, our parasympathetic, our sympathetic, and most of us are in sympathetic most of the time. And then we wonder why we have these health problems. We wonder why we develop these immune disorders, right? But it's because of what is going on in our unconscious mind and how we're trying to stay safe. I think I just got off target. Anyway, you can see I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. So and you know, I go through this when I'm working with my clients in my therapy. We quite often go into these memories when they're small children and they're in a cot and they're crying and no one came to them, right? Attachment style being formed right there. And the memories, when we go into these memories, the belief systems that we end up in, that we're working with and we're releasing the energy of, is I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. And there's your attachment style right there being formed at those points in time. So we don't have to be in these attachment styles. Whatever we're in, we can heal through them. It does take work, and you've got to want to do it, right? You've got to want to do the work. And there are a lot of people out there that can help you, a lot of embodiment practices. You know, there's a lot of self-help books, but you can only get so far, I think, using the conscious mind. You can analyze stuff, you can understand it, you can observe it, but until you actually go in and you go into the unconscious mind and reprogram and release this energy of these beliefs that are trapped in our body, then you're not going to get through it all the way. And some of my clients that I work with, that's what they tell me. I've done so much work, I've done counseling, I've done life coaching, I've read so many books, and I'm still trapped in my own head. Right? And that's where the unconscious mind, the important, the linking of the conscious, the unconscious, the emotional, the psychological, and the physiological together, which is what we do with analytical hypnotherapy, right? that's why we get such permanent and impactful change. And then when you bring in embodiment work and energy work within that and mix it all together, it becomes super powerful and helping people shift through this stuff. So you're not going to heal this stuff overnight. You're not going to heal it you're not going to heal overnight. You're going to heal in a month. It takes a while, right? And you've got to keep observing it yourself and keep going it back in. And we heal in layers. A little bit like a roller coaster going up and down, but we definitely heal in layers. The deeper you go, the faster you can heal as well. The more layers that come off as we move down through the layers, removing the masks and getting out of our persona back down to our unique self, our true self. You can heal a lot faster than you did. Anxious attaches and avoidant attaches can actually heal quite well in relationship together as long as they're both aware of what's going on and they're willing to work together on it. It's actually a beautiful way to heal. And that is one of the things I did realize about myself. I've got to a point of the healing journey within this, and I'm starting to see that it's like walking on a tightrope when you're in relationship with somebody, because these things keep getting triggered up, keep giving you the chance to do it. It's kind of like the Buddhist monk that sits in his hut in a forest and is able to be zen all the time because he's not getting triggered, right? And I mean, sure, a lot of Buddhist monks can come into community and are not getting triggered either, but the younger ones, the less experienced ones who haven't worked through all this stuff, they can be very zen, but when you put them back into their family situations and things like that, then they can get triggered. It's like that we can heal to a point, but unless we're actually allowing ourselves to be triggered and have the rest of it dredged up, then we lose the chance to really heal through our stuff so that we can really, be in love within our own body and giving ourselves what we need and to feel safe. And this is all about safety. Unconscious mind, it's all about safety. That's all it cares about, is keeping you safe. So I know I went a little bit longer than I meant to, but I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you do want some help with this, do reach out to me. And we can jump on and talk if you want to. But watch the rest of the podcast series. There's heaps of books out there, and also check out Georgia Rose and Chantel Raven, and their stuff is amazing as well. So I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you next time. I'm going to be talking about avoidant attaches.